Thank you for joining me today. And for those who do not know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans. I stumbled ass backwards into mindfulness and insight meditation almost 25 years ago. Or is it 24? It's 24 years. 24 years in April. So I'm getting ahead of myself. This was during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a raging panic disorder, which had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to leave the house. I was unable to go to work. I was on disability. Could not go past my front door without melting down. Happened to get paired up with a psychologist who, even at that time, was already several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me these tips and techniques and practices as a way of dealing with what I was going through. I was not impressed. My feeling was, I can't even leave my house, let alone work, go to the store, go out and be social. Here's this guy saying, all right, let's sit and watch the breathing for a while. Awesome. Thanks, buddy. He didn't give me anything else, and I was sitting at home riddled with anxiety all day anyway. And so I figured, all right, I'm going to try this just long enough so I can honestly go back and say to the guy, look, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? And as I say, that was 24 years ago in April. I haven't had that conversation with him yet. And here I am doing this. So I've found a fair bit of success here, to my own surprise, more than anybody's, I think. So I'm going to keep doing it for a while. And here we are. So thank you for joining me for this. Today's topic is on happiness. You know, that little thing. Not a big deal, right? I want to talk for a moment about how we do not find happiness, or at least I'm going to say for myself how I have not found happiness. I have a session out there, some of you may have heard it, called Stop Poking the Bear. That gets into the roots of why we pick at pain. It doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering or even emotional. It can just be physical. I'll give you an example that's very pertinent to me right now. When I was having dinner last night, at one point when I was chewing, I accidentally bit the inside of my lip. You ever do that? You get that little bit of swelling, and it stings. And then, of course, it lasts for, a couple of days, and it's a little thing, but it becomes annoying as hell, right? And you just can't stop poking at it with your tongue, right? Is it still there? Is it worse? Is it better? How is it now? What's the status? What's going on? Of course, doing that hinders the healing process, right? So we're really just getting in the way. We're maintaining and perpetuating that which we want to stop. The pain, the sensation, the discomfort. I found something similar with happiness. Spending a lot of time thinking, am I happy? And not necessarily phrasing it in exactly that way. It doesn't have to be, am I happy? Am I happy? Am I okay? Do I feel all right? Any of these things where what's the status? Right? I have found that to be about as effective as constantly poking that little sore on my gum. For the same reasons. Okay? For one thing, it doesn't really matter what the answer is. We keep checking again either way, don't we? If we get the answer that we don't want, well, we got to keep checking to try and, is it okay now? Is it okay now? Is it okay now? Mom, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Right? If we get the answer we do want, oh, it seems to be okay right now. All right, we're happy for a couple of seconds. Then, wait, is it still okay? Is it still okay now? How about now? How about now? All right? Not very conducive to happiness, is it? We get in the way. And there's another thing that I have noticed about this continual poking, if you will, at the, am I okay? Am I happy? Are things all right? Am I all right? There's a certain quality to it. There's a certain underlying implication behind that line of thinking. And this gets into what I call RFH, requirements for happiness. When we are engaging in those thought processes, we're usually focusing on how much success, if you will, how much success we are having with our requirements for happiness. What do I mean requirements for? I want to win the lottery. I want that much money. I want that car. I want that job. I want that relationship. I want that person to act like that. I want that person to stop doing that. I want the weather to be like this. The irony of requirements for happiness is that every single requirement for happiness that we have actually becomes another reason to decide we are not happy. We're creating a laundry list of reasons why we can decide we're not happy. Well, I don't have that, and that didn't work out, and I don't have that yet, and there's not that, and there's not that. Now, of course, what happens if we do end up checking everything off, and wow, we actually have, wow, everything. Great, I'm done, right? No, we come up with more requirements, right? Doesn't really seem to work out. And there's an even deeper irony underlying those requirements for happiness. Ultimately, it's not about the things. It's not about the money. It's not about the car. It's not about the relationship. It's not about that person's. What's it really about? It's about the feeling that we think we'll experience when we get those requirements satisfied. If you think back to when you were 5 years old, think about the things that you wanted that might have been your requirements for happiness at age 5. And now think about it for, say, age 15, age 25, 35, 45. Probably pretty different, right? Those things that were so important at 5, probably not a big deal at 25, 35. But what has not changed? Why we really want them. The feeling that we think we will experience if we get them. Which raises a hell of a catch-22. Because what is the feeling that we think we'll experience if we get them? Happiness. So what is ultimately our requirement for happiness? Happiness. Well, shit. How's that going to work? How's that going to work? I can't be happy unless I'm happy. No wonder we're having so much trouble. So let's start over. Me being the left-brained analytical guy I am, when I start at square one, I usually start with trying to get some definition around what it is I'm working with. In this case, happiness. What do I mean by happiness? Because clearly what I've been doing ain't working. So let me make sure I'm at least clear on what it is that, well, what it is that I'm fucking up right now, right? Let's see what this actually is and see if I can improve what I'm doing. What do I mean by happiness? Well, all sorts of ways that we can define happiness. What I want to focus on for today is short-term versus long-term happiness. Short-term happiness is the kind of stuff I was describing a moment ago. It's this specific delight. It's a short-term delight that is tied to a specific, in the case of my example, requirement for happiness. It's like this elation. I got the thing, right? That's mine. I won, right? In contrast to a long-term happiness, which is not tied to a specific thing. It's more of a calm abiding, an equanimity, a lot of the problem that we run into is we confuse the two. We think that the long-term happiness should look like or feel like the short-term. Think about when we were kids, every single nursery rhyme or fable you ever heard, and they lived happily ever after. What did we envision? I don't know about you, but I envisioned this state of unceasing bliss. Almost like the people who lived happily ever after were like, dropping ecstasy, just this impermanent, except without actually taking drugs, right? Just this never-ending ecstasy. Well, that's not really long-term happiness, is it? That's not sustainable. A lot of the teachings that I offer come from the Buddha, as you know, the historical Buddha, 2,500 years ago. And one of the things he talks about a lot is impermanence. And this comes up a lot when we talk about things like attachment and clinging, and very directly related to requirements for happiness, right? Because like I said, the things we wanted at 5, 15, 25, they all change. So we're attached to this thing, and then we're attached to that thing, and then we're attached to that thing. Are the things the problem? No. The attachment's the problem, right? The problem with attachment becomes especially profound and obvious when the things that we are attaching to are impermanent. Now, one of the teachers I reference a lot, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, an American monk, he doesn't use the word impermanence because we can all agree, oh, okay, yeah, this isn't permanent. That's not, the world's not going to be here forever. I'm not going to be here forever. He uses the word inconstancy, which really drives home the point that everything is changing right now. Not just the things that we want, but our feelings themselves. Our feelings are inconstant. So how could we possibly be in a permanent, unceasing state of bliss or ecstasy? You can't. It's like one of those charts, like a line chart. You've got all this area, it goes from 0 to 100, and you've got all this area. And if our mood is way up here at like 99, right? As we keep going, you can't keep going up forever. The higher you go up, the more room you have to fall, right? Statistically, it ain't going to last. It can't. It can't. One of the things I say sometimes is that the quickest way to meet your demons is to not get what you want. And the second quickest way is to get it. Because even if you get what you want, you're going to become dissatisfied with it. Your feelings will change. The Buddha himself said something very similar. He said, were there a mountain of gold doubled, it would not be enough to satisfy a single person. We're going to want more. So we always work our way back to this baseline. We have like this equilibrium of mood that no matter what we get, we always return to it. And we're always fighting that and exhausting ourselves in the process. And that doesn't lead to happiness, does it? Now, I heard this great phrase once that when we eat, we're simply surviving long enough to be hungry again. Doesn't mean we don't eat. But how do we work with this? How do we work with this? Well, I talked about the Buddha a moment ago. The Buddha only taught one thing. How do we alleviate our suffering? Not our pain. We don't have a choice about pain. We're going to experience pain. Suffering comes up when we do not deal with pain in a skillful way. Sometimes people think the Buddha was very negative because all he talked about was suffering. But he didn't talk about suffering for its own sake. He talked about suffering so we could release it. The Buddha was very optimistic. He said, look, we can do this. I did this. Here's how. So what I have found is we can change the direction of our focus from trying to perpetually increase happiness, which I sure as hell have found not to work. And if you have found it to work, let me know. We shift our focus from trying to perpetually increase happiness, and instead we work on reducing suffering. That's what we engage in this practice of mindfulness, insight meditation. We are using clear seeing to focus on suffering so we can learn to reduce it. The whole am I happy question, am I okay, am I all right, the stuff where we're focusing on our requirements for happiness and how we're doing with them, that ironically perpetuates our suffering because we are focusing our attention on the cycles of wanting based on wanting and happiness requiring happiness. Call it the happiness hamster wheel. Lots of running, not getting very far. Instead, we can ask, am I suffering? Am I agitated? Am I getting in my own way? Where am I doing that? How am I doing that? Why? Why am I doing that? And then we work to unravel those processes. A couple of funny things happen when we do this. First, that shift in attention short circuits those vicious cycles, the catch-22s, because we're not engaging in them. We're the ones fueling them, and now we are taking that energy, that fuel, and we're putting it elsewhere. But even more than that, what I have found is happiness. Happiness is the default state that's left after what I like to think of as this process of subtraction, as we are unraveling these processes of us getting in our own way, seeing what's driving those processes, seeing our motivation more and more clearly. As those start to lose their energy, as we start to experience a disillusionment, right? Because that's the illusion, is we think we're getting something out of them. It's the only reason we do anything. We think it's going to be worth the effort we're putting in. We're going to get some return. We become disillusioned. And we see, wait a minute, this shit ain't working. So there's this process of subtraction. As these things get cleared out of the way, what's left? A sustainable equanimity. A long-term happiness. A feeling of ease. Because we're no longer trying to get what we want, which is really a certain feeling, right? We're no longer trying to get what we want from things that are inconstant in a doomed attempt to maintain feelings that are equally inconstant. There's no solid ground there. There's nothing to build upon. There's no solid foundation in that. Instead, we are reducing the extent to which we define what we want as being a requirement for happiness, including maintaining feelings of happiness, right? Now, I want to be really clear here, because taken too far, this can start to sound very fatalistic, if you will. Might sound like I'm advocating blind, utter acceptance of anything. I'm not. What I'm saying here doesn't mean that we don't have preferences. What I'm saying is that we do not place our well-being on the whims of causes and conditions that are outside of our control. It's not that we don't care. There's a difference between not caring and opening to the experience of things as they are. And that difference is the willingness to feel. It's the willingness to feel. And that's a necessary component to reducing our suffering. Now, of course, I came to this practice because of a crippling anxiety issue. I also had some anger management issues. Not as bad as the anxiety, but they were there. And one of the side effects that I had over the years of practice was I realized, wow, my anger issues have largely dissolved. It was surprising to me at the time, but in retrospect, it's not surprising at all, because I was building a skill of learning how to feel my anxiety rather than getting caught up in the storylines I was writing about it. And not until I really, literally and figuratively sat with the anxiety could I clearly see the process, as well as what I was bringing to it. And, of course, what I was bringing to it was an insistence that it get the hell out, which isn't all that different from the insistence that, oh, I feel happy right now, with about the same results. Well, I ended up doing that with anger, too. Not intentionally so much. Just I got into the habit. I had built the skill of being able to watch what was coming up, what it was really like, how I was interfering, what happened if I didn't interfere. And suddenly I started to really feel anger in a way I never had before. What do I mean? I mean, I felt it physically. I came out of the mind into the body and felt, oh, wow, holy shit, this is what things I'd never noticed before. And I'm like, have I been feeling this every time I feel anger for the past, decades? Is this what it's really like? I never knew. Because I've been up in my head saying, oh, fuck that guy. Yeah, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to, right? And now anger is a very different experience for me. I get angry pretty rarely now, especially compared to how I once did. Not that there's anything wrong with it. When it arises, it arises. And I see it and I watch it and it dissipates in seconds or minutes instead of the hours, maybe days it used to. Because I opened to it as it is and was willing to feel instead of demanding how I should feel. When we compulsively attempt to achieve these feelings of delight that I was talking about, are we really seeking happiness? No, we're usually seeking comfort. It's important to notice that distinction. Am I really building a foundation for long-term happiness, or am I seeking short-term comfort or delight? Because let's face it, if the comfort route worked, we'd have found that happiness by now, right? I found it helpful to try replacing I need to feel happy. Or in light of the catch-22 I mentioned earlier, you could even phrase it as I need to feel happy in order to feel happy. And instead say, it can be okay not to be okay. Again, not saying we can't improve things. We're not just laying back, say, okay, world, life, do whatever you want. I'm okay with anything. I'm spiritual. I pray, yep, everything's fine. Nope, do whatever you want. No, not what I'm talking about. This is not a passive practice. This is an active practice. If there's something we can do, a skillful action we can take to improve things, we do that. But there are times when the most skillful thing we can do, perhaps our only skillful option, is to just make some space to feel. Get the hell out of the way. Do less. Watch more. And sometimes one of the things that will come up as we're watching is, well, I don't just want to watch. I want to do. I want to fix. That's what we're trained to do, right? Fix stuff. Get it done. Shoot now, ask questions later. If that comes up, okay. Guess what? That's a thought process that we can also watch. Right? This is a skill that we build, like I was talking about a moment ago. The paradox here is that seeing this process, discovering where we're seeking comfort instead of happiness, and adjusting our focus skillfully actually sets the conditions for a genuine happiness to arise. Partially because we're just no longer demanding it. We can begin to see that happiness is a living, moving byproduct. It's an effect. It's a process. We can't force it, but it's an effect for which we can set the conditions and causes to arise. And that's what we're doing in this practice. Through clear seeing, setting the conditions for a sustainable, long-term happiness to express itself. It's in there. It just might be buried right now, right? So short-term delight comes from having our requirements for happiness temporarily fulfilled. Long-term equanimity comes from releasing those requirements. Or at the very least, adjusting how we relate to those requirements. Because we're not just going to say, okay, I've dropped my requirement. It's not a light switch. How we relate to them, which again starts with this practice, clear seeing, that we'll be doing in a moment. And what I've found is, as we develop this equanimity, I've certainly found I don't miss, which isn't to say I don't still fall into it sometimes. Of course I do. Of course I do. But in those times of equanimity, I find I don't miss the erratic nature of delight or the chasing that's required to get it, and then the energy expended in an attempt to maintain it. This is what allows us to open to life. And this is why I often say this practice of mindfulness and insight meditation, this practice will give you everything if you ask nothing of it. If we ask nothing of it. I think that's a good segue into some sitting. The one cue I often give before we sit is, if you are seated, to have your hips elevated higher than your knees if possible, which is good for your breathing as well as your posture. If that's not possible right now, not a big deal. Something to keep in mind for the future. And let's begin, as we always do, by imagining that we are suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of our heads, which is a nice cue for sitting up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. You may notice that you have some tension right now. Perhaps in the shoulders, in the back, maybe in the face, the jaw, a furrowed brow. That's completely fine. We do not have a requirement here that you do not feel any tension. Because what happens if we have a requirement to not feel tension? Well, we try to force the tension away. And how do you force something? With tension. And I have found that trying to get rid of tension using tension is about as successful as trying to force myself to feel happiness. To force myself to not feel anxiety. It's just another way that we get in our own way. Are we here to do that? No. What are we here to do? We're here to see. We're here to see any tension that might be here. We're here to see how we might be interfering in a way that is well-intended, but backfiring on us. Okay? So as we sit here, we are suspended from the ceiling. We're dangling. Any part of our body that is not actively holding us up can release in its own time. Which may be today and may not. I also like to notice what is beneath me. The chair, the floor. Something is supporting us right now. There can be a feeling of grounding. We've got this grounding at the bottom and a lifting at the top. And let's just take a moment to notice those two poles and whatever we happen to have in between. And if you haven't already, you may start to bring your attention to your breathing. And notice if the breathing changes when you bring your attention to it. It usually does. Usually does. And why is that? Well, usually, when we bring our attention there, we bring a requirement with it, right? Oh, my breathing's supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be like that. It should feel this way. It should feel that way. Is that what we're here to do right now? Fulfill a requirement for our breathing? No. Our only requirement right now, if we have one, is to watch the breathing as it is and notice if we have any requirements for it. And then maybe notice how we handle that. Is the mind saying, oh, you're practicing meditation. If you're going to be a good meditator, your breath better be this way. Better be long. Better be deep. Better feel real, real good, or you're not doing this right. That's what the mind does, right? You have to do this because you need to feel that. Again and again and again, right? And I talked about changing our relationship with those requirements. Well, we can do that right here with the breathing. Do we have a requirement for the breathing? If so, what is it? What if we just observe that requirement, that thought process that has that requirement, without chasing it? Are we willing to feel what that's like? Let's sit with our attention on the breathing for a couple of minutes and see what we can see. Now, as I said a few moments ago, sometimes the most skillful thing that we can do, our only real skillful option on the table, is to make space for what's here. Well, that's exactly what we're doing right now. We're making space to see what arises. And usually, once we do that, a lot of things arise. A lot of things have been stored up waiting for the opportunity to express themselves. And now that we're finally giving them a chance, ooh, baby, they're not waiting. That usually comes in the form of thinking. And you want to talk about requirements. I don't know that there's a bigger misconception about meditation than that there's a requirement to have a clear mind with no thoughts, which in my experience works out about as well as all the other happy horseshit requirements I've talked about in the last 45 minutes or so. If we've got thoughts coming up, we can notice, what are these thoughts requiring? Well, you have to think this through to the end to make sure it's solved, because otherwise this is going to happen. Okay? And you got to think that thing through else, or okay. And then underlying it all, of course, is the thought that we shouldn't be having those thoughts because we're meditating, right? Oh, must be doing it wrong. No good at this. All these requirements. How are they working out for us? Chasing after them. It's like they say the mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. So we watch what the mind is doing. We watch that the mind doesn't always like to be watched. We prefer to maintain the illusions, the chasing, the delights, the comfort instead of a sustainable happiness. Because it's confusing them. This is the delusion that the Buddha talks about. The delusion that is the cause of our suffering. We anchor on our breathing and we watch those processes play out. And we get caught up in them and carried away, and then we notice and we come back. Notice the compulsions that come up to think about a certain thing. And watch what happens. Like a scientist conducting an experiment. If we simply watch the process of that happening instead of jumping into the storyline. How does the mind react if we don't just blindly follow? I mentioned earlier about how some people misconstrue the Buddha's teachings as being overly negative because of the stress on suffering. There's a similar misconception about the Buddha's teachings on renunciation. People often think, oh, I'm not giving up all my stuff, right? That's not what it's about. I have plenty of stuff. I have too much stuff. We don't give up our stuff. we give up the dysfunctional relationship we have with it. We renounce a lesser happiness so that we may experience a greater happiness. In a moment, I will wrap up the sitting with a quote from Thanissaro Bhikkhu, the monk I mentioned earlier. But first, I want to invite you to, later on as you go out through your day, throughout the week, you might notice your requirements as they come up. Sometimes just around this practice. I remember a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic started, Staples, the office supply store, were starting this thing called Staples Spotlight, where they were offering various free classes, and they reached out to me and said, "Oh, would you like to have some of your sessions here?" I said, "Sure." And I remember I was contacted by, I think it was a woman in this meetup, maybe someone on my mailing list, who seemed a little perturbed by this. Like, a mindfulness session in a Staples store? That, seemed a little, I don't know, maybe disrespectful to the practice or some such. But what was really funny was the exact Staples store that I ended up doing the session in was one that back in the day when I was unable to leave the house and was having to learn how to get back out into the world again, well, I did that by gradually making my way back out into the world again, and my practice was a huge part of that. I was taking walks around the block and 2 blocks and 3 blocks and slowly learning how to drive again. And through all of those, I damn well better believe I was meditating as I was doing it, watching what was arising, so I wasn't interfering and making things worse. That was my path back. And that Staples was across the street from the job that I had and was then on disability on and had been unable to go to. So when I started practicing getting out of the house again, I was like, well, if I'm going to get back to my job, I need to get accustomed to getting back out into that geographical area again. So I would regularly make trips to that exact Staples so I could regain some familiarity and comfort with being in that area. And every one of those trips was a very meditative experience. So I found it funny in a very ironic sort of way that someone was reaching out to me and saying, well, it somehow seems inappropriate to meditate in a Staples. What an interesting requirement for one's practice. My requirement for practice is not in an office supply store. And I'm not saying this in a way to say, oh, look at that woman. She's so silly. She's so stupid. No, not at all. What I'm saying is, notice where our requirements come up. And are they really built on a solid foundation? I'll wrap up with that quote that I mentioned a moment ago. This is a pair of quotes from Tanasaru Bhikkhu I've kind of mushed into one and paraphrased a bit. Notice the Buddha doesn't say physical pain leads to suffering or that disappointment leads to suffering. He says it's the craving, the clinging that lead to the suffering. Those are things that happen within, which means that it's within your power to change the cause of suffering into the path to the end of suffering. If the cause of suffering were something outside, it'd be beyond your control. After all, other people have their freedom of choice and can do what they want. The world has its ways of changing all the time. If it were the real cause of suffering, the suffering that eats into the mind, then there wouldn't be much hope. So we're living in the same world of conditioned things as everyone else, but we're approaching them in a different way. The cultures of the world teach us to delight in gaining conditioned things. Thrills, people, power, possessions. Thinking we can stop there. This practice teaches us to delight in developing skillful mental states, to delight in abandoning unskillful mental states, for the purpose of a happiness that's unconditioned. Okay, before we get into a little Q&A and discussion, I'll put some links into the chat. These free sessions are supported by individual one-on-one sessions that I do with folks who maybe are going through something right now. Perhaps you are dealing with something right now and they would like to work through them using this practice the way I have and so many others have. So that is something I offer on a limited basis. The first link is to my website, and you are welcome to reach out to me there or book a session on there if that's something that's of interest to you. The second link is to my YouTube channel, where I publish some of my older sessions that you can find out on Insight Timer and Simple Habit and some of those places, as well as these sessions. So you can go out on YouTube and see those, as well as on Patreon. All the same sessions are up on Patreon. Patreon's a great site if you want to make a contribution on a one-time or an ongoing basis. I've also had some people ask me about contributing Dana or donations through Venmo. So I've also put my Venmo in there at Mindfulness in Blue Jeans. And I believe that's all I have. So if you'd like to talk about some things that have perhaps come up, any questions you have. Hi, yes, a hand from Chris. Hey, Chris.
Hey. While I was meditating, I just had, just different visions and things. Like, I had this sudden urge to want to go hiking, actually. Just going there for meditating and, just a lot of like mindfulness and just improving my mental health by, stepping out of my comfort zone and doing things that I've never done before.
Absolutely. That's a huge part of it. Goes to what I was talking about a few moments ago, is the necessity of getting out of our comfort zone. And I was talking about making those drives to Staples and so forth and getting out of the house. And that's something I still do to this day, almost a quarter of a century later. I don't mean I still drive to the same Staples, but I put myself deliberately in situations that are unfamiliar and uncomfortable, because otherwise I start to shrink inward again, the same way that's really what ended up with me being stuck at home with agoraphobia, was attempting to only feel comfort and shying away from anything that caused discomfort. And of course, if the comfort zone isn't growing, it's shrinking. So my comfort zone got smaller and smaller and smaller till I couldn't leave my bedroom. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that, in the necessity of always pushing against the boundaries of our comfort zone in a healthy way. Of course, we don't go overboard and have it backfire on us because we try to do too much too fast, but absolutely working with the comfort zone so it's being pushed a little bit, so we're experiencing that growth, is, in my experience, crucial. It is a crucial aspect of this practice, and engaging in the practice as we're doing so is what allows us to not get in our own way and to experience that growth in a healthy, sustainable way.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm 100% with you on that one.
Yeah.
Cheers, man.
Thanks.
Hey, Francine.
Hey there.
How's it going?
Well, thank you.
Good. Good to hear that.
You know what really struck me was you mentioned, that lesser happiness and greater happiness.
Yeah.
And that's something that I found is really, I step into a lot. And a lot of times that comes with when I really get engaged with something, like Chris was saying, going out for a walk or something, if I'm out, just poking around the yard and I find something and it drags me down a road and I end out someplace I haven't been before. And then it's 3 hours later. And getting into that zone, that's the happiness. And, other times it's when I engage with something that's serious work. I think it's a lot of times it comes back to that losing myself. And it's something that also happens every once in a while in meditation. Not always, because sometimes the brain's going bing, 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 bing. But it is that same kind of, it's a body engagement. It's a letting go of a variety of things that you think are your world. And it's look at this. And I mean, you can, like me, I can get lost and just spend time, just digging up the garden. And it's a level of joy that's just different.
Yes.
And it's I really do think it's that, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's those different levels of happiness and what we choose to see happiness as.
Very much so, because what's the big difference between what you're describing and the am I happy, am I okay, and all that happy horseshit I was talking about? What's the big difference in our focus in those two scenarios?
Doesn't really have a whole lot to do with anything outside of you.
Yeah, there's no focus on the self.
Yeah.
No focus on the self. Isn't that interesting?
It's not stuff.
Yeah.
And you have a tendency to believe your world is stuff.
Uh-huh.
And it isn't.
That's that disillusionment I was talking about. That's that disillusionment. And the mind will fight that disillusionment every step of the way, because it thinks if that illusion is taken away, we disappear.
Yeah.
We die. There's nothingness.
And the thing is, you can feel that pull, trying to pull you back into the, no, that's, you have to be somewhere else. You have to be doing this. You have to be doing that.
Which always comes from a place of fear.
Yeah.
I found.
No, yeah, fear's at the bottom of so much of it. It's, And it's all the things that we think are normal that we find out cause fear.
Yeah, normal's a great one. You made me think when you said that back to my extremely early days with the psychologist who got me started in this practice. Normal was a word that I started to see in a different light very quickly, because what he was offering me was an opportunity to see reality more clearly. And one of the early issues I had with that was that actually stirred my anxiety more. And part of the reason that stirred my anxiety more was because all I wanted to do was go back to feeling the way I had felt before the anxiety reached a point where it had become crippling. And was I thinking about the nature of reality during those times? Well, no. So I found myself thinking all I want to do is engage in my normal thinking again.
Uh-huh.
And then it's at one point, and this is one of those insights that I had in my early practice, I realized, wait a minute. What I'm calling normal thinking was habitual thinking. It just seemed normal because it's what I was doing all the time.
And what you knew.
Yeah. Wasn't normal in the sense that it's what would simply come naturally. It was a habit I had formed, which had come to feel normal.
Mm-hmm.
The same way we habituate to stress. I think I posted something a couple of days ago about how stress is intended to be a one and done condition that, gives us the energy to deal with something that needs to be addressed, rather than this chronic condition that it turns into, which feels normal.
Yeah, saber-toothed tiger versus traffic.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So chronic stress comes to feel normal, to the point where relaxation becomes unusual. Does that mean relaxation is not normal?
And uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. It does.
Why am I sitting here? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We start to feel fear about it because it's like, well, wait, this is different. I'm not prepared. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it's not because the stress is normal. It's because it's been normalized. Habitual. Normalized. Yeah. Normalized. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's great stuff. Cheers for that. Thank you.
Well, thanks.
Cheers. Hi. Yeah. Linda.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Hi. How you doing?
Great. How are you? I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I love these sessions.
Awesome. Thank you. Cheers.
I just kind of had two comments because what the gal just was talking about made me think of two things. One is during this pandemic and everything, I had a really tough, we all did. We had a rough transition, and I was talking with my sister-in-law, and I said, I just want things to be normal again. And it was like she almost hit me over the head with I needed a 2x4. And she said, there is no normal anymore. There is no normal. Forget that word, because it doesn't exist in this right now, in this lifetime. And it's so true. Like everything we knew, especially people of our age, it's all different than it used to be. So that was just one, because I don't use the word normal anymore. So because I don't even know what that means. And the other thing was when she said about fear is coming along in my own growth. Somebody once told me fear is false events appearing real. And I was like, wow, the fact is, mostly when you're fearful about something, and I just went through some anxiety because I started a new job and I'm terrible with technology. And I was like, I was going to quit before I started because I was so outraged about it. And again, I got to go back to this one. She's not a therapist at all. She's like my sister-in-law. And she said to me, they didn't hire you because you're technology. They hired you because you're good with people and you know how to help people get work and blah, 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 blah. And it was so true. And I was so fearful that I couldn't do this stuff. And now I'm learning it. Look, I just unmuted and you can hear me. This is huge for me, okay? So I just want to say, that was it. I just wanted to share those comments because they helped me. And so I just kind of wanted to reach out to you guys. That's all.
Awesome. Thank you for that. One thing on each of those, I think, normal is a funny word because if you think about it, it comes from norm, which, of course, in sociology is the things that we've all agreed on in society are acceptable. This is the norm. We do this. And if you deviate from that norm, that's unacceptable. And again, right in the word, people have decided what the norm is. We decide. There is no normal. Normal is your normal is not my normal, is not somebody else's normal. Normal is just another illusion, isn't it? It's just another mind state. It's another thought process that we're ascribing to something that is outside of our control, usually. For the fear bit, yeah. Of course, I have multiple things that I talk about in other sessions around fear and all kinds of stuff I can't get into here. But I do want to share this quote, one of my very, very favorite quotes, which is usually attributed to Mark Twain. I don't know if that's accurate or not, and I'm probably not going to get the quote exactly right. But it's something along the lines of, I've lived through some terrible things, some of which have even happened. God, I love that quote. And if I ever write an autobiography, that should probably be the title. So, yes, thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Cheers. Thank you. Hi, Judy.
Hi, Ron.
Hey, Judy. How's it going?
Good, thanks. I was sort of going back to your comments that you made in the beginning about anger and how your relationship to it has transformed. So what I've been coming up against for a long time now in my meditations is I'll be meditating and then all of a sudden it's like, I'll meditate and maybe like one day I feel really good after a meditation. And then the next day I feel really good after a meditation. And then all of a sudden I'll be meditating and like I will just hit this brick wall of total anger and just sort of like, it's almost like this part of me that is like, you are not going any further. You are not going to be happy, and it's just like this really intense anger. And then it puts me like in this terrible frame of mind. And then I sort of give up on meditating for a while because it's so horribly uncomfortable. And so, I mean, I don't know what to do with that or what that's all about, but it's just been happening for so long and it's really frustrating. And I'm sort of just not, sometimes I just try to sit with it and just be like, oh, okay, this is what's here, but it's so intense and uncomfortable. So I'm not articulating myself very well, but I'm not sure what to do with it.
No, you're doing great. It's interesting that you notice this as something that's recurring. And it comes back a bit to what I was talking about with the mind not liking being watched, being seen. Mind doesn't want us to see how the sausage is made. Because the mind is the one putting up all the illusions. Well-intentioned. The mind is goddamn crafty. The mind is trying to keep us safe. The mind really isn't our enemy. It thinks it's doing the right thing. It's just not doing it skillfully. So, similar to if we experience a sudden physical trauma, we'll go into shock. And that is so that we can survive and do whatever it is we need to do to take care of ourselves to fix that situation. I remember a number of years ago, I had a physical trauma on my hand and went to the emergency room and was very thrown by the fact that it didn't hurt at all. And I felt completely fine. I didn't even think I needed to be there. And I'm saying to the doctor, I'm like, do I need stitches? He's like, yeah, you need friggin' stitches. Like, dude, get on that table. afterwards, I was talking to a friend of mine who happened to be an EMT. And I relayed all of this to him. I said, yeah, the weirdest thing was it didn't hurt at all. And he says, yeah, it didn't hurt. You were in shock. I was like, oh, that's shock? I always thought shock was this catatonic state. And I was like, no. It was my wife who ended up driving me to the emergency room. But he said, no, your body went into shock so that if you were alone, you could have driven yourself to the emergency room. Oh. So this is what the mind does, is it tries to protect us. And it sounds to me like you're hitting this wall of something that needs to be expressed, felt, experienced. And the mind is saying, oh, no. Oh, don't open that. In fact, you're not ready. You don't get, no. You know what? You can't even meditate. No, stop. Just stop. We're not going there. Not for you. Nope. And of course, one of the things that I would offer for that is what you've already mentioned is, oh, what happens if you sit with that? You know, one of the things that I like to say is there's that phrase in spiritual circles, how the only way out is through. And I always like to amend to that. Yeah, usually the only way out is through, but not always all at once. What you're doing is appropriate. You're noticing, okay, this is too much right now. Like I was saying to Chris a few moments ago about skillfully pushing against the comfort zone. It is appropriate sometimes to step back and say, okay, not going to meditate right now. I was listening to a talk a couple of weeks ago from someone who was talking about oscillation or pendulum, something they use in therapy now where you go back and forth between, touching that thing that's really painful, and then you come away for a while. And then you come back and touch a little bit and you come away for a while. You know that something is there, obviously. What we don't really know yet is maybe what it is or the appropriate way of feeling our way into it. But there is this protective layer there that, again, is well-intentioned, but ultimately sort of backfiring.
Yeah.
I would suggest a couple of techniques that you might try with that, based on my experience. You may try, similar to what I did with like anger, for example, a lot was coming very much to the physical experience. The physical experience of that anger. Okay, there's a storyline coming from the mind saying this, that, and the other thing about it or whatever. Bringing the attention really, usually for me, it's in the gut. Usually that's where that felt sense is really, but it may be someplace else for you. Do a body scan, say, okay, where am I feeling this physically? Where am I just feeling this physically? And see if we can cut that mind-body cycle. Let the attention just come to the body. But you may also try a very opposite sort of technique, which is to ask the mind, well, why not? Why can't we do this right now? What's going to happen? What are you protecting me from? What is your motivation? What is your agenda? What are you feeling? Not as an interrogation, just an interview, a conversation. What is your concern? You may get answers, you may not. You may get answers in a verbal form, like it's talking to you in words, or you may get some kind of visual imagery. You may get a bodily sensation. Who knows? You are clearly open to experiencing something that another part of you has not opened to yet. And this may be one of those times where, as I said a couple of times throughout today's session, that the most skillful thing we can do is to simply make space for that. And as you have found, sometimes even making space for that may be too much. And in those times, you go do something else. And then you come back a bit later. But I do encourage you to maintain some consistency with doing that, such that you can get past the current roadblock. In the last session on karma, I talked about karma is if we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to keep getting what we've always gotten. So I get the impression, it sounds to me like you're coming up against this same spot again and again and again, which to me says, okay, time to try something a little different. Change up the techniques a little bit. So try some of these things and simply make space for the results. See what the results are. You don't get to say what the results are. You're a scientist. You're a scientist. Yeah. You're setting new causes and you're seeing what the effects are. And then we'll decide what the next cause should be based on those effects. But right now, we just change these things and we see what happens. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Cheers. I am going to let it go there. We're a couple of minutes over. I want to respect folks' time. I know there's still a couple of hands up. If you have something that you want to bounce off of me, you've got my contact information in the chat. Feel free to reach out. And everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I hope this was helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.
Have a good day.